Okay, welcome everybody to our panel discussion on Wilder Than Wild, Fire, Forests, and the Future. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. We are recording, as you just heard. And we ask that guests joining, go ahead and keep your cameras off and keep yourselves on mute. And then if you have any questions as we go along, feel free to type them into the chat box and we'll relay those questions for you. If you want to see the panelists, I think all on one screen, you can select non-video participants. Is that right, Stephanie? And then they'll be able to show up.
Yes, you'll be able to hide the non-video participants so you can see everybody on one screen in the gallery view.
Perfect. Okay, so we're excited to bring you this program today as part of our Book to Action grant, which was provided to us by the California Center for the Book. This event is being held in partnership with Monrovia Public Library. So prompted by the events of 2020, which was a record-setting year for wildfires that burned across the state of California, we decided to focus on the theme of sustainability for the Book to Action theme. In our discussion today, we hope to raise awareness and encourage action to promote personal and community disaster and wildfire preparedness, and to learn more about everything we saw in the documentary just now. And if you didn't get a chance to see it all the way through, or not at all, we are still having it available through May 22nd. So let's get started with some quick introductions. My name is Rachel Fiore. I'm one of the adult services librarians at the Whittier Public Library. Stephanie, do you want to go next?
Yeah, for sure. My name is Stephanie Ulate, and I'm an adult services librarian at the Monrovia Public Library.
Kevin, do you want to start?
Yeah. Yes, and I'm Kevin White, one of the filmmakers, and just want to express my appreciation for Rachel and Stephanie and for the libraries, the Whittier Library and Monrovia Library, to have this event.
Thank you.
And I'm Stephen Most, also one of the filmmakers, and I'll also express my appreciation to Elizabeth and others who were in the film and from whom we learned a tremendous amount while making Wilder Than Wild.
And Elizabeth?
Yes, good morning. I'm Elizabeth Azus. I'm the Secretary for the Cultural Fire Management Council, and I also head the Food Securities Division for our native foods. It's an honor to be here, and thank you so much.
Welcome. Thank you all for being here. Kevin and Stephen, or either one, I had my first question was basically what led you to make this documentary? What kind of fueled that?
Well, I could start with that and give you a little background. When the Rim Fire occurred in 2013, a friend of mine and of Kevin's, who's in the Forest Service, said, take a good look at this because this is going to be much more typical. I learned a new word, the mega fire, a fire of 100,000 acres or more with a fairly high percentage of severely burned area. And it hadn't really been on my radar, before 1995, there was one mega fire a year somewhere in the United States. And then that increased so that by 2014, when we started the film, there were about 10 megafires per year.
Wow.
And since then, that has increased so that in 2018 in California alone, there were 3 megafires. And then last year, there were 5. So this is an increasing phenomenon. When we started the film, we were looking at forests. And of course, much of the burned area is in forest. But as we've since learned, the chaparral, the oak woodlands, all of California is open for burning. And last year, 4.5 million acres of the state burned. So this is an increasing phenomenon. And the idea that it was increasing and deserved attention is why we began the film.
Mhm.
And we've been watching this ever since.
I guess I would add that, when we started the film in 2014, we had no idea, of course, that we would be where we are here in 2021. And I'm up at the cabin right now that you see in the film, and I was just mentioning before, all the folks up here are very nervous. It's very dry and extremely dry for May. And so we are all kind of living on the edge. And I guess what we really wanted to do in the film is to get people to kind of rethink their relationship to wildfire. As we have suppressed wildfire for a long time, and we have had a warmer, drier climate, we find ourselves living in fire-prone areas that traditionally had fire in those fire regimes. I mean, this is true all through California, actually all the West. We've gotten out of balance with respect to that. And so now we have these catastrophic fires that are just kind of something we need to learn from right now and adjust to as quickly as possible. We need to rethink how we're living with wildfire. And so that's part of the process, and that affects all of us, whether you're anywhere in California, in a wildland urban area, in a suburb, an urban area, or even in the Sierra foothills. So that was kind of the goal for making this film, and something that we really wanted to get the word out as well. So
That's great. So that kind of leads to my next question, which I think you answered, but have you seen, how have the California wildfires changed since you made the film? It sounds like it's obviously gotten a lot worse.
Well, yes, the wildfires have encroached and burned areas where a lot of people were living.
Mm-hmm.
That occurred while we were making the film. 2017, the wine country wildfires. 2018 is when the Camp Fire destroyed the town of Paradise and 86 people died. So the impact on populated areas has gotten much worse. And then besides the burn areas themselves, as you'll recall last year, much of California was suffering from the smoke from wildfires. So while megafire was a new word for me 8 years ago, it's something that we're all acutely aware of now.
Yeah, I was going to say, maybe if we didn't have necessarily a fire in our backyard, but we definitely dealt with a lot of the smoke that was coming through. But I think Stephanie, you had the Bobcat fire right in your backyard.
Yeah, we certainly did. And it's scary to see. And we were a community that had been several years until we had something so close to home. And so we had predominantly we were able to be aware of it. I think when you live in the state of California, you're very aware that this is going on. But then this put it right at the forefront of all Monrovians' minds, since it was very much in our backyard. And much like you said, I think this was a year, at least in just my personal experience as someone that I don't have, professional background with fire or anything like that. But, you can't really ignore it because there's the smoke, and we all see the sky up and down the state with that impact. So, yeah.
Yeah. That was definitely right there where you guys are.
Yeah.
Elizabeth,
Again-
I had. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna ask Elizabeth. They talked a lot about the prescribed burns that they were wanting to do. Is that something different than fire lighting?
Well, actually, fire lighters are prescribed burners.
Okay.
So we like to say that we train fire lighters and not firefighters. Yeah, obviously, if there's a fire, an issue, we're going to have to work with it. But in general, we prefer, to do some good for the community. We're a little different out here. We have a deeper understanding of fire. It's family for us, and we work with it, not against it. So our community is a little more adapted to dealing with, fire in general. And they actually get very excited when we're doing our prescribed burns. We do a spring and a fall burn. So, it's educating the community. It's letting the community know that, yes, fire can be extremely dangerous if not, worked with in a proper way. But if you're out there cleaning and working on the landscape, we all need to do it together in order to make this work. The planet's huge, and with just tiny groups here and there doing this, it's going to take us a while. So we need to communicate with each other about how to do this better.
And do you have to be specially trained if it's outside of your area, or do you have people from the outside come in and help at all?
We do actually. We put on a training exchange twice a year, spring and the fall. We bring in the Nature Conservancy, the Fire Learning Network, firefighters from around the world. And the difference with our training exchange compared to others in WUI areas, we actually are more environmentally attached to our area. And so we teach, about the basket materials that we burn for, the food sources that we burn to restore, the medicines. It's more of someone has called an ecotourism training exchange, which was not our intention in the first place, but we do cultural presentations, we do storytelling, we feed them traditional foods, show them how they're gathered. So it is kind of evolved into something that has really been able to help us reach out further from our territory to other communities. And there are other indigenous communities that are burning all over the United States right now. We're working with our Indigenous Peoples Burning Network through the Fire Learning Network. And, the Nature Conservancy has been amazing with helping us to reach out across the country and teach people about this very important subject before it's too late for all of us.
Oh, that's so much to learn about. So they can obviously come out to where you are and learn about those things.
Yeah, we just finished our spring training exchange a few weeks ago. We were able to burn just under 100 acres, but one of them was for elder structure protection. The other was for, two of them were for basket materials for hazel. And then one was for a prairie restoration. So not only do we burn for basket materials and community safety, we also burn for prairie and meadow restoration to open up the historic pathways for our big game, the elk and the deer and these things, to move through the woods safer.
Oh, that's great. Is there are there any challenges to being able to do those burns? I imagine people might talk about the smoke part of it and saying, maybe that's bad too, to have the smoke, but are you able to explain that to people in a way who don't know about it, that, in a way that they know that that's a different kind of burn?
Yeah, we do work very close with the tribes, the Yurok Tribes Air Quality Department and the Humboldt County Air Quality Department. We reach out to community members ahead of time. We let them know, what's needed as far as air purifiers or clean rooms or things like this. But, the thing that's the most difficult is the permitting processes. You have all the governmental red tape to allow you to do things. We're slightly different here in ancestral territory because we have our own sovereign rights. And so we work closely with our tribe to make sure that we're staying within our region, that we're doing, good for our environment versus bad. Smoke actually has a benefit in this region. A smoke inversion layer will cool down the water so that the fish and the aquatic life can travel in cooler waters. So we're more adapted to dealing with a little bit of smoke versus a mega fire smoke, which can last for months. Prescribed fire, the smoke just goes up and disperses and, helps the environment. It kills the weevils in the acorn trees. It affects certain insects in ways that, are beneficial to our environment. So, there's a lot to learn from obviously the, people that come out and teach these processes for us. And there's a lot to learn from our elders. We listen to our elders, we take into consideration everything they're trying to teach us. And then we in turn teach that to the younger generations that come on. So it's definitely a learning process, but well worth it.
Yeah, it sounds like it. That is very fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. Kevin, I guess, or Stephen, you talk about the fire suppression and the climate change are putting the wildfires on sort of a collision course. Have you seen a change in the way people view fire suppression in the past year since you've made the film? Or do people think that's still the only way to do that?
I would like to think we're seeing a change in fire suppression. I think I'm hoping that people realize fire is not the enemy. It's our suppression of fire on top of a warmer, drier climate that has resulted in these, larger fires. And also we have folks living in wildland urban areas. And I think that awareness about wildfire in general has certainly increased. It has to, it has to, obviously. But I think what's important is that communities everywhere are recognizing that they have their own responsibility to figure out, well, what's the fire regime in our area? Like in Whittier and Monrovia, you have that chaparral, and the Bobcat fire burned a lot of chaparral, and that actually has a pretty big impact on the on the vegetation afterwards, right? Because invasive species can come in. And so all of this has to do with figuring out what's your local fire regime and how are we going to respond to this? Here in California, we have, of course, lots of people living in wildland urban areas, and millions. And so that's added a complicated layer to our, and I saw somebody mention this in the chat about how we're going to work with housing in those areas. We have to rethink that a little bit. I think that there's lots of materials that we can use that are more fire resistant. I think keeping a defensible space is essential now. I think there's lots of things that we can do that I think most folks living in California and frankly in the West realize this has to be part of our, our routine now. Every year we have to think about this. So I think that is changing. And I do think it's changing. The challenge, of course, with really busy fire seasons is that you have these firefighters who are just exhausted, right? And then you want to do some prescribed burning, and you may not have the money, there may not be the political, will for the locals. They need their tourist season, in September, October, November, December, as the season pushes out. So there's a lot of logistical reasons why it's also hard to have prescribed fire. And yet we know we need it, and we know the fire isn't going away. So that's the paradox right now that I think every community has to grapple with.
I would just add that California has moved from a reactive relationship with wildfire to a much more proactive one. Yeah. The state and federal government have put almost, or at least they plan to put $1 billion into responding to the wildfire emergency here, with the goal of treating 1 million acres a year for the next 10 years. When we met the then chief of CAL FIRE, Ken Pimlott, who's in the film, he told us that his philosophy changed by working with the Yurok and Karuk tribes. He was so inspired by their fire lighting, he realized that they had been much too focused on suppressing fires and not proactive enough in treating vegetation and in lighting fires. So there's been a philosophical change and a practical change in California that is very welcome, but I think we still have a long way to go.
So
if I could jump in there really quickly, Rachel, because this reminds me of a conversation that we recently had with our fire chief in Monrovia. And he had mentioned, that there's a significant additional funding coming down the line to focus more on preventative measures. And, that, as you mentioned, that philosophy change, I think it is even kind of trickled down a lot at that local level, because our fire chief here in Monrovia had also mentioned, this is something that we need to be doing, and we need to move away from suppression. So hearing that, directly from him as someone who's, very embedded in our community, was very hopeful. And I think too that, they're also trying to shift that narrative away from the idea that all fire is bad, because he and other local people in Monrovia, since the Bobcat fire, as a part of the Book to Action program, have shared with us that, we have, a plant species that here called the Bronton's milkvetch that is very rapidly going away, because it's a plant species that can only reproduce in fire conditions. So it makes me, hopeful to hear that folks, in the community are learning that. But I also, I hope that we can get that message out through programs like this and more, to get that information out there to our communities. So. And I also see, Rachel, that we have another question in the chat.
Oh, okay.
It says, I've heard that the Biden administration is looking to restore a conservative core type of service. Could this be a force to train for wildfire suppression activities, or wildfire prevention, not suppression?
I'm guessing that meant the California Conservation Corps, the CCC. And absolutely, I mean, I'm a big fan of the CCC. I think there's lots of ways that we can do all kinds of measures with them. And I think that there is a lot of collaboration right now between different firefighting agencies and folks doing prescribed burns and the CCC. I think that's already in place in some areas. So I think that's the kind of thing that we need to do more of. And as Steve was mentioning before, the funding, I think, is there to recognize that we have to change our focus to prevention and not just be reactive. And that's the key to the future with relationship to wildfire here in California.
Yeah, and that made me think about something I think Elizabeth said in the documentary, that you said if you look, something kind of profound, that if you look anywhere around you, the earth is smothered out, suffocating. So if we cannot clear that and help the earth breathe, we are going to suffer. So it's like, how do we help the earth breathe? How do we help that in our own way? I guess people with the prescribed burns, or people making their space defensible spaces.
Yeah, we are actually. So Cultural Fire employs a full-time crew, and we're able to do that through a grant with CAL FIRE. We've secured a grant close to $1 million to do a 5-year project for exactly what we're talking about. Restoring our environment, working with the community. We have family-based burning, where we teach families how to clear around their homes, how to burn piles, how to broadcast burn. We provide equipment and crews to go out and help them. But in general, we teach those families how to do that. Through the Indigenous Peoples Burning Network, we're able to reach out to larger masses of people and explain to them how important it is to save your native species, your serotinous plants that are fire dependent. For us, we started out to do this for our basket materials. Our weavers didn't have any more hazel, and they had used up what their elders, their mothers and grandmothers had left behind. And some of the elders were coming forward saying, okay, somebody needs to do this. And Cultural Fire was actually born out of building healthy communities. They came to us, asked us what we needed in our environment. And out of all the people, the 250 people that they interviewed, what they wanted back on the ground was fire. They didn't care about a store, a hospital, any of the things that civilization in general wants. our people wanted fire back on the ground. We wanted to be able to return to our traditional way of restoring the land without having to worry about the green and the red trucks coming after us.
Mhm.
So, you know, it's going to take a while for everybody to get to this point, but, you know, fire is the greatest tool left to us by the Creator to restore our environment. And if we don't use that tool, it will use us completely up.
I never thought about fire as a tool and not something to fear until I was watching this documentary. Was there a question?
Rachel,
Yeah, go ahead.
if I could jump in with the question, you know,
Yeah.
we're learning through really important documentaries like this and leaders like all of you about how these are changes that we need to make and how we've kind of known about this for a while now, or at least, you know, certain people have. So it makes me wonder, you know, since it's very obvious after watching this film and speaking with you, what are some of the barriers to making this more common practice and widely accepted? Because to me, it just makes sense and there should be nothing in the way from us making these decisions. But it appears that there are things preventing it from becoming more widespread.
You know, I would say that, you know, working with the local fire entities where you live, the first thing that needs to happen is some type of town hall meetings or community meetings where you can explain to people, you know, what's going to happen if we do not be proactive in this situation. We can see it happening all over the world. It's not just California. The world has been on fire for a while now. And unfortunately, you know, we overuse our planet, you know, for resources. You know, we use our water to death. We use, you know, we're fracking and drilling and, you know, doing all of these things for the greater greed is what I call it. When in fact, this planet is the only thing that's going to sustain us. And if we don't take care of this planet, we won't have a reason for all the fracking, the fuel, the whatever else that we need to extract from this planet. It won't matter anymore because the planet won't be here. You know, this needs to happen on a global approach. Everyone needs to be looking at around their homes, around their neighbors' homes. You know, we care for our elders here. We make sure their homes are cleared around. We clear around our schools. We clear around our roadways. We open up our creeks and our rivers. You know, we spend a lot of time maintaining nature because I think I live in one of the most beautiful places in the world. I live directly above the Klamath and Trinity confluence, above my family's village, you know, where my family came from. So, you know, I'm more attached to this land, I think, than anybody else because I can see on a daily basis what happens here when we actually actively work to restore our environment.
Yeah, it's definitely
Thank you.
important after seeing, like Stephanie said, that it seems obvious that this is what should be happening, and it'd be nice to see it more out there and more resources to at least show people why this would work better than what we've been doing with the fire suppression.
I'd like to speak to a
Oh,
couple
sure.
of the obstacles to having this change in practice. One of them is that people, for good reason, don't want smoke in their environment. Many people have asthma and so on. The Central Valley in particular is like a bowl. But people need to and of course there are all these bureaucratic layers that Elizabeth mentioned to get permits to do burning, to create smoke, to generate smoke in the atmosphere. So it's going to take education for people to realize that prescribed fire or cultural fire can occur under planned conditions, looking at the topography, looking at the wind, and minimizing the smoke as compared to a mega fire, which is going to be completely uncontrolled and fill the atmosphere with smoke for a long time. So that's something people need to learn. And I think there needs to be some streamlining of the permit process. The other, I'd say, major change that needs to occur is philosophical, because in our society, our civilization, we're very property focused, very materialistic, and And fire is seen as a bad thing because it can burn things down. It's a danger. We're so urban, we see fire as something that can threaten our lives. And the idea that fire is a positive tool, it's something that we really need. It's something that increases our health. If the earth isn't breathing, if the trees aren't breathing, we're not breathing. This is our idea of our relationship to the larger environment, and the idea that fire is part of it, that fire is a force of nature. This is something that people really need to learn, and that's happening slowly. I think the tribes have been very instrumental in educating people about it, but it's a process, and we are trying to be part of that ourselves through our film.
It really is a huge mind shift that just has to take place in order for us to make better traction. And I think education really is the key. I mean, just look what Elizabeth and her tribe are doing with cultural fire. And as a model, that's something that we can all learn from. And guess what? That's been going on for millennia. And it was really only when the settlers came here that we kicked it out. And that's why I look at that photograph of Yosemite Valley, post-settler. It is just amazing to see how much fuel there is in there in such a short amount of time. And so I think it's just, we can learn from this. We can learn from Elizabeth. We can learn from everyone locally too, that understands how fire works. I guess I would only add that it works best in our experience when communities kind of come together. As Elizabeth was saying, that having a town hall meeting and kind of working together with respect to thinking, how are we going to address this locally, and communities getting to know each other, figuring out each other's strength. I saw that there was a question there about somebody who hadn't maybe raked their land or hadn't done defensible space area. I know that you can go find those folks, but I also think another way to do it is to try to work with them. You just knock on the door and say, introduce yourself and say, hey, do you need help with your property here in terms of clearing space here, and just trying to engender this idea that we're all in this together and we can do a better job at it if we work together. So
there is so much to learn. Yeah.
And I see that question as well that says, how do you approach what is essentially home maintenance with property owners who do nothing to care for their property for various reasons, which can be health, lack of money, lack of interest. And I can just give an example that was shared with us from our fire chief a couple of weeks ago, where he had mentioned that they're working on a project where they're going to be seeking out volunteers to help some of the home owners that are up in our canyon to make those changes and to do some education about, he said a fire can simply get started, on your home just by having a chair out on your patio, and an ember catches there, and then suddenly it catches your home as well. So he talked about, some education for the community, getting some volunteers to help people that can't do it for reasons like you mentioned, like health, lack of money, and then for the lack of interest portion, I believe for folks that just choose not to get involved in that volunteer process, or for just different reasons. I think they're going to there's like some legislation coming out that it might just be local. I would need to go back and confirm with the interview that we did, but he mentioned there might be some fines that are coming into place for people that don't invest in some of that home maintenance, or at least connect and say, hey, I need help with this. So that's just an example that I became aware of recently. So
that would be a great opportunity. Yeah.
I'd like to add to that. Something we do here in our region, we teach about fire from the Head Start program all the way into college. So, we do demonstrations. We talk about what can happen if we don't take care of or maintain these environments. We mentor, young people. We work with young people, teaching them how to care for their family and their environment. You know, these are things that are ingrained in us because, you know, we have oral histories. We didn't have written histories. So we tell stories of how things happened through history to now. And being able to mentor the young people and explain to them how important they're going to be, because they are our future. You know, if we don't teach these young people now, we're going to go down a disastrous path, you know, where we'll have a bunch of people that are going to think that, oh, well, someone else is going to handle this for me. It's not always going to be that way. You know, there is legislature in place to help with these programs. There's funding coming out. There are trainings happening all over, you know, the United States right now. And, you know, like I talked about the prescribed burn training for the certified citizen burn boss. These are things that, you know, grew out of all of us that work in the fire industries or entities. And we know what's going to happen if we don't be proactive. So, you know, getting that out there to your kids, you know, don't, you know, sugarcoat things for your children. Tell them the truth. Tell them what's happening in their world. Tell them how their environment is changing and how they can be part of, you know, the solution and not the problem. That's the biggest thing right there, is getting it out there, talking about it, you know, finding those solutions, teaching the young people that, you know, there's an elderly family down the street and they don't have children or grandchildren. Maybe you could go down and spend an hour with them, you know, pick up some things, help them. A lot of elderly people aren't able to do that for themselves. And with, you know, their resources the way they are, they don't have the funds to hire someone to do that. But there are young people out there that are willing to pick up a hand tool, pick up, you know, a mower, a weed whacker, whatever, and help an elder out just to make themselves feel good. So, you know, teaching our children, that's going to be the biggest thing, because they are the ones that are going to move us into the future. So we just need to make sure they have the tools in their little tool chest to make this happen for all of us.
Yeah, that's so true. And that's a great idea to teach them from such a young age all the way up through college to get more of that education across.
Mm-hmm.
Stephanie, are there any more questions in the chat?
Yes, I see we have one here. It says, what are you doing and how can we help to publicize this film so it can be widely seen? For example, PBS, you know, things beyond that.
We actually are. We have had a national feed on PBS, and we are up to maybe 450 broadcasts across the country. And I have to say, what's particularly exciting about that is that we got a lot of broadcasts on the East Coast and in the Midwest, and we got responses, and folks from all over the world are actually using the film and in community screenings and things like that. And so that feels really good, because you know, as we mentioned in the film, this is happening all over the world. And so Elizabeth has a friend in Switzerland that has, you know, been promoting using the film. We've done a bunch of screenings actually in Australia, New Zealand. So, you know, this is something that is an issue for the world right now. So I do feel good about being able to participate that way. The PBS broadcasts in California have been pretty strong, actually. KOCE in Southern California was one of the folks that really helped bolster this. So also KVIE, the Sacramento station, and KQED, our Bay Area station. They've all been pretty good about promoting the film and giving us, we got prime time on a lot of pretty good size markets, which is rare. But the truth is, I'm a huge fan of events like this, like shared viewing, shared discussion. And you know, as we start to enter into a situation where we maybe can go into theaters, you know, together and be together, not just virtually, it will be really exciting to be able to have some of those opportunities, because I think that's where, you know, I'm a believer in the power of shared viewing. So I would throw that out there. I hope one way you can help is we could do, you know, more community screenings. So
that's right. We've had more than 400 community screenings, most of them in California, and I feel that's really important, because while the increase in wildfires is a global phenomenon, every fire is local. And people have to address it in local terms. The vegetation, the topography, the wind patterns, the fire regime, the fire history, all of those are very particular. And also particular is the built environment, the energy infrastructure, the transportation layout. The Bobcat fire was lit by, was ignited by transmission lines, you know, and a transformation in our energy transmission system is something that could reduce the incidence of wildfire. When we did a Berkeley community screening, there were people from the Pathways Association talking about the paths through the hills in the East Bay that will enable people to evacuate in the case of fire. So in each case, there are local people, local activists who might say, well, we have to get rid of these flammable eucalyptus. You know, there are very specific things that each community can do. While the increase in wildfires is really dramatic and alarming in many ways, what we learned is that all of the factors that have spurred this increase are ultimately within our control. It's the housing patterns, it's the policy of fire suppression, which is a federal policy. It's climate change, which can be addressed in part by changing our energy system so there aren't these big coal-fired plants and one-way high-intensity transmission lines connecting them. And of course, as you spread out the population, there's more long-distance lines as well. So there's a tremendous amount that can be done. And I think we're at a moment in history when people are looking toward the future and seeing what can be changed to make the world better for us.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of options out there, and starting in the community is a great way to even begin, right? And like you said, sharing and learning more about some of the things we've learned about in the documentary. Um, is there anything that we've left out that you guys feel that needs to be addressed? Anything that we might not have touched on? I know we kind of covered a lot.
Well, there's one thing that I'd like to amplify that was mentioned, which is community. You know, because so many of us live in our bubbles. We've been living more in bubbles under the pandemic than usual, but so many of us don't know our neighbors. And we are accustomed to think of a fire that can start inside of a building, you know, and we call the fire department. But what's happening increasingly is that fires are coming from the outside of our built environment, and they're consuming whole areas of housing at once. And so we need to be aware of this as neighbors. And just to give an example of the importance of this, there were about 9,000 buildings, mainly houses, that burned in Coffee Park during the wine country wildfires, and about 45 people died. But look at those two figures, 9,000 buildings, 45 people. You know, the fire professionals, the fire trucks didn't get there in time. When they got there, so much had already burned. But the reason why more people did not die was that folks started going house to house. You saw that in the documentary, banging on doors, helping people who had mobility issues to get out. People helped each other. And in an emergency, that tends to happen, but it's something that we can be much more proactive about and get to know our neighbors better and get to know who's going to need help in an emergency and help and encourage each other to have kits, emergency kits, so that we don't lose our valuable papers and our other valuables. You know, there's just so much that we can do proactively, and it involves a kind of change in understanding how deeply we're all in this together as a community and also in relationship to the nature around us.
Those are all great ideas, and hopefully as things open up more and more, we'll be encouraged again to go out there and get to know our neighbors, if the ones we don't know, and find out who will need assistance. And yeah, that's really great. Thank you for sharing all that. Was there any other questions in the chat, Stephanie? I think that was the last of my questions, or if you had any questions at all or any more.
Gonna double check to make sure I didn't miss any. Okay, I think that's all from the chat. And that's all for my questions as well. I was able to get all of them in there as relevant topics came up. So
I had one quick question actually about in the film. Were they ever able to rebuild that Camp Tool? I forgot how to say it.
Camp Tuolumne.
Yeah.
The short answer is it's in process. They had to raise some money, and I think it is going to happen. But it raises the bigger, better question, which is, what then do you do when you have these places in the woods that are prone to wildfire? So, and this is just going to keep on going. So keep, doing a better job of keeping defensible space and doing all those things, but recognizing also, for those that have never seen a wildfire up close and personal, it just like the Butte fire, it literally just consumes the forest and right in front of you. It's like we're a quarter mile away, and you can just feel the heat. You can barely stand there, right? So it is not, the force of a big wildfire is something that we're going to have to recognize, and this is why it's so critical to do all the work we can for prescribed burns and prevention, so that we can mitigate this. I do believe that we're going to probably have to rethink about how we have our communities, or rebuild our communities in places. And like, I know in Paradise, it's a very complicated question. I mean, I'm not even sure there's the tax basis in Butte County to be able to do everything that they need to do. So, the stakes are pretty high if we don't do something about this as now, right? Just going to continue.
Just looked like such a beautiful camp.
Yeah.
It will actually reopen next summer.
Yeah.
That's good to hear.
Is that right? They're going to open it next summer for sure? Good.
Yes.
That's great.
Very nice.
yeah, and related to that, we had someone specifically ask, would you rebuild if your home burned in the Butte fire?
Tough question. I mean, really, honestly, it's a very tough question. I know a lot of people really wanted to be there for the community, and they, went through all the hassles with insurance and stuff to rebuild. And I know a lot of people said, no, we're just going to take what we can and we're going to move. And, both, I mean, it's sad. I mean, one thing I will say, insurance is definitely playing a role in all of this. Insurance is a big issue. Up here in the Sierra foothills in the Sierra, the only insurance you can get is California Fair Plan, which is incredibly expensive and very limited and not particularly good. They're just redlining all these areas that are fire prone, and they're not letting homeowners or get insurance. And so, insurance is going to play a role in a lot of that decision making, unfortunately, and already is. But rebuilding is like a really big question, I think, but the strength of community can really, I believe in the strength of community, and that we can overcome some of these barriers and move forward in a positive way. So we can only do our best, right?
I'd like to add to that. The other piece, with the insurance companies is they're pulling liability insurance from fire entities, prescribed burning organizations per se. So, they're making it even more difficult for us to do our jobs. It's hard to get insurance. It's hard to get coverage to be able to do what we do. it's something that I've been telling people, reach out to your legislatures, to your, council people, whoever is in charge of, getting insurance for your areas. Talk to them, tell them how important this is to you, because, pretty soon they're going to tie our hands so tight that we won't be able to help the environment no matter how much we want to. So we've got to work with those insurance organizations, and they really need to work with us.
Very true. Very, very true.
I think that's all
Alrighty.
the questions.
Yeah, that looks like it's all of them. Unless if you have any final thoughts you wanted to share, we could do that. But if not, then we can kind of say thank you and move into some of our closing slides that we have to share with everyone.
I just want to
I
say
have
thank
one
you for
thing I'd
this
like to
opportunity.
add.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say, most of these areas that are burning in the WUI area themselves are old fire footprints. So if you're looking to move, you're looking to change where you lived, research the fire history of that area, because a lot of these fires are burning in areas they have burned in historically since time immemorial. For some reason, Earth has its special places that it likes to burn, and humans love to be in those places. So we need to figure out how to work together, all of us.
And I'd like to, I see one question that really hasn't been addressed. It's about the idea of a climate conservation corps that is a proposal of the Biden administration. It's not just the California CCC. And I think this is a very important initiative. There are a lot of young people who don't have jobs, who've been confined in their homes without school, who don't have practical experience, and to get them into the woods, into natural places, for them to be able to work together the way people did in the CCC in the 30s, to earn some money, to gain some real skills, to see the results of their work. I think that's very important. And so much of the work that needs to be done to respond to the danger of catastrophic wildfire is handwork. We don't want these huge machines coming in to the forest. They're often very, very destructive to the future of the habitat. If you can get young people in there working by hand to clear some of the vegetation, the smaller trees that are creating this tremendous fuel load, it will be a benefit for them as well as to our forests, and help them be more resilient in their lives as the wildlands become more resilient in our country.
That's true. I've actually been approached by the Nature Conservancy and asked to be a mentor to some AmeriCorps youth. And so I'm thinking about this seriously, because I was in the Corps when I was younger, chopping redwood trees and picking cones and clearing streams, doing all these things that Stephen has just talked about, getting out into nature and, seeing how important it is. I can't think of a better tool to give a young person than hope in their environment. Getting them out there, showing them that what they do with their two hands can really turn around an environment. And the more hands we have out there, the more young people we mentor, I can't see anything wrong with that. I just see great things coming from that.
I think then what we can do is thank you so much for everything. I'm going to go ahead and just put some information up on our screen. Okay, so thank you so much everyone for joining us today. We have a couple of events coming up soon, and the first one is coming directly out of the Whittier Public Library. So I'll let Rachel share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so we're having our community members read the graphic novel A Fire Story by Brian Feiss. After he lost his home in the Tubbs fire, he decided to, write and draw this graphic novel. So we'll be talking with him about that.
Very nice.
And then also coming from the Monrovia Public Library and also in partnership with Whittier, we are going to be having a conversation with Christopher Diaz from the Chumash tribe, who is their fire keeper, and he's going to be speaking on a lot of things that came up today, like prescribed burns and how not all fire is bad and that fire can be a tool and that philosophy can be shifted. And he's also going to speak a little bit about some of his work as an activist to protect ceremonial lands for places where prescribed fires can happen and things even beyond that. So that's coming up on May 22nd. I can put the link to sign up for that event in the chat. And I also believe, Rachel, we could probably send an email out to everybody that's registered as well,
Yes.
if they'd like to join us.
Absolutely. I'll send a follow-up email with some of the events and yeah, for sure.
All righty. And again, thank you everyone so much for joining us. We're so happy that so many people were interested in being a part of this today. And we do have a survey, as this is a grant program. We have a very short survey that we would like everybody to fill out, and we can send this in an email as well. But for folks that are willing to take it after we close today, I've linked that event in the chat. And the documentary is available for a little bit longer. So please go ahead and share with your friends and family the information that I believe went out in an email for signing up. Like we talked about today, the more we can share with the community, the better. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And we hope that you have a wonderful rest of your weekend and rest of the year.
Yes, thank you for the panelists. I appreciate you being here and educating us.
Thank you. Thank you for doing
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Yes, thank you for having
Bye.
us.
Great.
Bye.
I'll stop
Bye.
the recording now as well.